Welcome to the Business Grind, where we give you an inside perspective on what it takes to start, build, and run a successful business. Here are your hosts, Danny Shaw and Sean Michael Wellington.
Hello to everyone in podcast land today. Thanks for joining us. Sean, how are you feeling?
Good and ready to have our first second time guest. I guess is the best way.
Yes, our first second time guest. You are correct.
Yeah.
Mark Testa. I always get tongue tied with how to properly introduce you. So as I will defer to you, Mark, on how you will introduce yourself to our audience today.
All right, Mark Testa. I'm the owner and founder of Mark Steven Agency.
Oh, well, that was
an experiential agency.
Okay, that was pretty simple. I could have done that. All right.
All right, but you know what? I do want him to tell us what an experiential agency is. I know it's probably going to go down later, and for the people who might not know what that means, though, I just want him to give us a quick explanation of an experiential agency.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah. So an experiential agency is pretty much an event-producing agency, creating experiences that kind of help build brands.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
All right, and we're going to get more into that, especially since, the experience can range in various mediums and environments and so forth. So for our audience members who might be joining us or may not have gotten a chance to dig into some of our past episodes, Mark was one of our first guests on the show in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, right? So we spoke about the business, how your business was impacted at the time, predictions on how, changes moving forward. So I think we can just kind of just dive right in and just kind of talk, like if you can share your experience on how the pandemic impacted your business, for good and bad, and how did you navigate those changes and challenges since then?
Yeah. So I feel so honored to be your first second-time guest.
Oh, for sure.
So, yeah, I mean, it's changed. Well, when it started, we were kind of thrown off completely. Mm-hmm. Had to figure it out. Probably the worst time I've had. But we shift. I don't want to use the word pivot again, but we shifted around. Dan, with a little help from your team, we did some virtual stuff and really kind of engaged in that and taught ourselves a lot of new stuff. Mm-hmm. Particularly these virtual worlds. We figured we weren't going to go towards like the virtual like Zoom meetings and all that. That was being done, and there was enough people doing it. And we decided we're just going to, push into this virtual worlds, which for us, we were already doing renderings and design stuff for presentations. Mm-hmm. So I had somebody on my team who was really into it and wanted to learn more software. So we kind of dug into the whole gaming software and kind of figured out a way to kind of engage that and kind of like bring that to life. And we had a couple of clients right out of the bat who, they were stuck too. And they're like, what are we going to do? We can't do live events. And it's like, well, we can try to recreate what we think is a fun event virtually on a computer. So we created this whole world with them where people can walk around, they shop, they were able to sell sponsorships and all of that. And then we did that for a couple of times. And then until some live events started coming back. So we were actually doing both. We did Essence Festival last year where we were able to do the live event, which was much more scaled down. People didn't even know what was happening out in New Orleans. We were doing live, but we were also doing the virtual counterpart, which worked out nicely. So now, we have both skill sets that we can rely on to kind of help, drive business.
Right.
And I'll be honest with you, it feels a little deja vu right now. So, with Omnicon,
right.
So.
Definitely.
I'm curious, since you kind of ventured into a brand new space, during the pandemic, so you created this virtual experience, this hybrid virtual event. How did you find your price points and what to charge your clients? Because it's something new that a lot of them probably weren't even that used to, right?
Yeah, for us, it was tough too. We had to figure out, we couldn't just go, percentage on total, which we used to. We had to look at the amount of time it was taking us to make these things. So, we knew how long it took us to do a rendering. Say it was, a full-on world was 40 hours. And it's like, okay, well, how much is our hourly rate? We probably, didn't make a whole lot of money on the first one, but then we learned real fast that we had to start charging a little more. And then we started looking at what other people were charging. We're like, all right, so, we can definitely charge more. The great thing that we've discovered through the year was that our margins were better. We weren't out there. I wasn't spending money on carpenters and staff, huge amount of, brand ambassadors and all that kind of stuff. It was really just us and a team working hourly on a computer. So I wasn't, going out and, spending money on random stuff or travel or any of that stuff. So at the end of the day, we're like, our margins were, closer to what I like them to be compared to actually live events, which was a nice surprise.
I'm assuming prior to the pandemic, like all of your work was live events in person, right?
Yes.
And then the shift during the pandemic to being all virtual and a new landscape that you're really not, too familiar with. Let's say, where would you, with the reopening, but then also possibly the non-reopening with the new variants, what is your percentage now of like live events to virtual events type work and projects right about now?
It's hard to say. I mean, here we are, beginning of 2022. We had a number of stuff heading into the end of 2021 that were starting to get canceled again. There was a little bit of a shift in the Thanksgiving. People started getting nervous again. So it's hard to say. I mean, I would say we were about 50-50 mid-year, with the hope of going 75-25, with 75 being the real world. And then things started shifting. And now heading into 2022, just today, somebody came who was actually producing a big event. We weren't really involved in it, but they're actually scaling back, and they were reaching out to us to see about virtual now, which is interesting. So it's like, I'll be honest with you, I just don't know.
Right.
Our skill set is still, live events. However, we are still part of our thing is design.
Right.
So, that's always helped us. Like, we're working on a project now, and when you say experiential, the lines do get blurred a little. So right now we're doing a branding event for a real estate company, which we're going into their office and redoing, branding and imagery and all of that kind of stuff. And that's going to take us for the next 3 months, which is great because we've always had that skill. We would do branding and graphic design and all of that for an event. Now we're actually doing it for a real estate company and their offices. So that's a whole nother thing. But to me, it's all kind of the same. And we have that skill set we can rely on.
Could you speak to any emotional? I'm assuming there's probably some emotional things that you had to deal with the business and changing things and just figuring out how you're going to make it work during this time. Because, there was a lot going on in the world as a whole, right? Let alone your livelihood.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with that. I don't know, the first time we did the podcast, I think I had already gone through, because I was at home. We'd already gone through the initial shock, and that happened within the month of March 2020. March of 2020, we get the initial shock when you have 5-6 things get canceled at once, and you realize everything's gone.
Right.
That was hard. Laying everyone off was hard, because that had to happen immediately, because you just watch the rest of the year just disappear. Once I got past that and realized it was out of my hands, there was nothing I could do about it. I just kind of sat there and was like, all right, let's breathe. And then we had to try to figure it out. How long is this going to last? I don't know. What do we know? What have we learned, and how can we make some money? And like I said, for me, it was just a situation where I had no choice. I still have a child and, and a house and every, apartment that I have to pay for and all of that. So we have to make it work. That gets you through a lot. But at the same time, there was a certain amount of, I don't want to say relief at the back end. Well, there's a little bit of relief when you realize you weren't alone on this. I think that happened a little later. When you were talking to people, who do what I do, and they were in the same situation. And like you said, some did not make it. I've had vendors who just didn't make it. And at the end of 2020, I had to scramble. We had like a 3-year contract with a nonprofit, and one of our vendors, went under. And I was like, I had to satisfy that 3-year contract still. And I had to figure that one out, and he sold his inventory, and that was challenging. So we figured it out, and then we just kind of just take day by day and kind of go where we have to go. And I'm finding this right now. I can get really upset about this Omicron thing, but there's nothing I can do. All I can do is say, hey, where's money to be made? Where's the business to be made? What's some low-hanging fruit, or what do we have going on, and let's just focus on that rather than what we don't have, what we don't know.
All right.
And do you feel like you still have to be in a position of like always pivoting and always trying to just make sure you have, the next revenue stream on your horizon, just because of the variants and how things are still like very in the air?
Yes. Yeah. And I think there's some good that came out of, a lot of good that came out of COVID. It's how I felt about like 2008. It's about how I felt about 9/11. I've gone through this is my third one as a business owner, and I was like, if I've survived this one and I've survived the other two, that means we're okay. We're going to make it. Surprisingly, 2020 probably made more profit than I made in 2019, even though 2019 was a bigger year, because we were just so focused on survival, which was interesting. I mean, our revenue wasn't huge, but the margins were higher. He's like, you kind of made money here. I'm like, I did. And then 2020, so then I pulled all the projections back for 2021, and, I set a goal. And now looking at now we're in January 2022, I set a goal for 2021, and we actually hit it. So I have to look at that and say, all right, it wasn't 2019 numbers, but we hit our goal. We knew we set a goal, we knew where we needed to be, and now we were able to do it. So this part of it is like, if I can do that, I can look at 2022, look at the world around me, what's happening, and then set a new goal, and based on rely on experience and knowledge. We've now had this business for 17 years, that we've survived through all of this. We will continue to survive. And like you said, Sean, we got to keep evolving, and COVID has told us that we have to evolve. And if you don't, you're going to die. So it may be little evolutions here and there, or even the digital, and Danny, too, this whole digital stuff, we got to keep changing, because it's changing all the time. Somebody hit me up for NFTs. I'm like, okay, I don't know. I understand. No, I shouldn't say that. I don't understand them. I pretend to, whatever. But
I call them digital baseball cards. That's what I call them.
That's a good way to put it. I'm like, and somebody was saying they were buying real estate in the metaverse, and I'm like, and they're spending $1 million. And I'm like, we were just literally having I was speaking with Harry from my team literally before this call, and we were talking about the digital metaverse and how we provide real estate. He's like, well, the real estate is $1 million now. So I'm like, okay, I need to understand this, because somebody's going to ask me this, and I at least need to be knowledgeable when somebody asks me. So I have to force myself to kind of keep up to date on all these things.
Right. Yes, it's a lot of change going on here. I think I would be curious to, now that you're in these different spaces, right? Any, like you said, now you're learning more about the digital space and trying to figure that out. And even if you don't really know what the NFTs are and things like that, anything within the last 2 years where you're just like, this is something this is one area I just would rather not do, even though, it's part of the new world that we're in, and it's still not something I'm totally ready to get into that's related to experiential work.
No. Okay. No, I be honest with you, I'm pretty much open to it. I'm trying to stay away from things that everybody else is doing. Like I said, the Zoom meetings, for some of these nonprofits, you get your little package in the mail and, you do this Zoom meeting and it's like nobody really likes, I shouldn't say that, but I don't think people really like them. The nonprofits where, it's all online. I'm like, that's not what I signed up for. It's a little boring to me. So that's why I'm leaning a little bit more towards these virtual worlds, like, the metaverse. And before we were playing around, Danny, we were playing around before this was called the metaverse.
Right.
Now it has a name. I'm like, we're on it. It's kind of cool to say we were kind of there. I don't know. We were just doing what we're doing to survive. But, I know some experiential have literally leaned into the whole Zoom nonprofit meetings. They send out an invitation. Somebody comes on, somebody says a few words, it's like, to me, that is completely boring because we have to do the Zoom meetings with clients. I don't necessarily want to do a Zoom event. And I've done a couple, we've done some fireside chats for the, like the mayoral race. We helped a nonprofit with that because we understood it better than they did. So we set everything up, and I'm like, and then somebody came back to us and said, can you do it again? I'm like, you know what? I didn't say this, but I didn't feel comfortable, and I didn't want to get wrapped up in that world, because I think there's some people that are doing it and they're doing it very well. I just didn't want that to be my business. I would rather push a little further. I'd rather push into the metaverse. I'd rather push into the NFT. I'd rather explore that, because to me, they're closer to a live event, because you can move around and it gives you a feeling and an emotion. It gets you, it's like gaming. It gets you, there's something there. Watching an image on a Zoom call, where half the people are probably not even showing their face, doesn't do it for me.
Right. Was there COVID compliances that you had to be considerate of and think about as you were designing these things? Was that a responsibility that came on you and you had to adhere to these new rules, or how did that work for you?
So yeah, I mean, the protocols were everywhere. Depending on the time of year, when we were out in New Orleans, this was, back in June when we did that, the Essence project, every person had to be tested every single day, and it was a tremendous amount of people who weren't vaccinated. So we had to send people away, and then guests had to come. We actually had temperature checks at the time. Guests, we didn't have to worry about as much, but we really, really limited who was there, and it was people were chosen, invite only, so it wasn't the big crowds. I mean, a little further down, we did a project in October. It was just everybody had to be vaccinated. Including staff. And I've had a few people on staff who refuse to get vaccinated. So I'm like, you can't work on the projects. And I unfortunately, I was like, they're like, but what do you mean? I'm like, look, this is the way it is. These are the rules. And it actually makes it a lot easier when the state or the city kind of dictates it, because when you tell somebody they can't work, it's not my opinion. It's like, I would love for you to work because I need you to work. But at the same time, if the state says, you can't work because of, or the city, because you're not vaccinated, then you're not working.
Right. Did you have to get any type of certifications and training, or did you have to outsource, or bring in another vendor for these type of live events moving forward? How did that work?
No, I mean, I think, outside of the testing, we had to, get professionals to test. When we were in New Orleans, we had vans out of each venue testing everybody. But as long as we were following the rules of the city, and we would get printouts, at the start of the event, and I still get emails from the city of New York that come to me and say, these are the rules, and I got to follow them. So as long as you go through that, you're fine. And you have to you have to proceed as if they're checking you. We were at this venue. We had to do everything that we could. And I remember collecting, people would sign up. Did you test? And I'd keep all the paperwork. Even though somebody didn't say I needed to keep the paperwork, I was concerned that if somebody ever asked me for it, I had the paperwork proving that I did what I was supposed to. So we were just relying on what was happening, or what the cities were, what the city or this federal, guidelines were, which still they're changing every day. So you just I got to keep up on it.
Now, Mark, I remember a lot of the events I was doing like right at the start of the pandemic when things were like opening back up. We had to bring on a COVID compliance officer for a lot of our events. Is that something you had to run into too? A COVID compliance officer who would check like masks and have hand sanitizer and thing like that?
No, we just pretty much did it ourselves. I mean, we would have security guards. We were pretty well versed in most of this stuff, so we knew what we needed to have, and we kind of went above and beyond. So, if it's hand sanitizer, we had hand sanitizer stations everywhere, and we'd always have a guard standing at the door. Everybody would have, if somebody had to show their vaccination, I'm not the one standing at the door. I knew New York State, you need to show that vaccination card or that app. So we would have that guard then help us to do that. It was just, they were just primarily security guards. They were probably trained in that way. I don't think there was an official school in this. I think it wasn't brain surgery on a lot of this stuff. It was like, just do what you're told.
With regard to where we're at now with this new landscape, what are your predictions for the future of your business and the sector that you're in moving forward? You went from doing mostly, not mostly, all in-person events to having to change your business model to adapt to the times. And now it seems, there's going to be more adjustments that you'll have to make. What do you kind of see on the horizon happening for your industry?
Yeah, just based on what I'm hearing, just even this week, during the holidays, things were quiet. Now that things are opening up and some of the projects that have been on the books are getting pulled back a bit. So it's tough to say. I mean, I don't know how, the Omicron variant is not what we were in 2020. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier. I think there's a lot of, in my opinion, there's probably more panic and hype to a lot of it. I think it will fade by the spring. Mm-hmm. I don't see a lot of people doing big events, until the spring. I mean, we've got some stuff scheduled for like April. Mm-hmm. Conversations are being had right now. They're not pushing it. I just know that the more immediate stuff is being pulled back. If you look at, like, for example, the Grammys, once like the Grammys get pulled and they wait, people are going to watch that. And when the big events are pulled, the smaller events are going to be like, hold on. I don't want to, let's just wait and see what they do. So I don't see anything happening until this. I think it's slow until the spring. Mm-hmm. And then my wish is that by spring into summer, we start getting back to normal. And then we're hopefully by the end of the year, some sort of normalcy. I feel that there's a pent up energy still. And I found it at the end of 2021. People wanted to be out, the events, and they were coming back really fast. We just had a little bit of, but now we're getting a bit of like, hold on. Let's not go so fast.
Right.
It's going to be slow. It's going to be slow, but I definitely think it's back. I think when it comes to events, I've talked to a lot of people, there's no better way to build brand loyalty than through events. Mm-hmm. And they're ready to go. They just want to know that they're safe. And nobody wants to be the one, or no company wants to be the one that created a super spreader, because they're going to get blamed. So right. They're going to wait and see, but they want to do it, or they're going to do it smaller scale, like we were doing in 2021. We were still doing the same events. Rather than 1,000 people, you had 200 people, and then you were live streaming.
Mark, could I ask you about one of those events specifically? Because I saw that you had worked on the Hennessy activation with that like piece of art. So I just was curious, how did that particular like project come about? Because it seems as though, I don't know, Dan, you could jump in if you have a different opinion, but I feel like alcohol companies and things like that were okay during the pandemic. Like they weren't hurting as much as some of the other companies. No. So I was just curious, why the need for an activation like that? And then also, how they approached you.
Yeah, I mean, we had worked with Hennessy when they had sponsored the Essence Fashion House, which, the Essence Fashion House happened in Fashion Week in September. And that's another example. September, people are still on the edge. But, New York Fashion Week and IMG were still pushing forward with Fashion Week. So once they gave the go ahead, we were going, but there was still some time we were on edge. But we continued forward. They then got Hennessy to sponsor that, and we were helping Hennessy build out their activation. They were doing the green rooms, they were doing the VIP, they were doing a photo op. So they got to know who we were, and then they were sponsoring a nonprofit event in November. And they called us. They're like, look, we want to do a photo activation. And I'll be honest with you, we were like, look, it seemed very small at the time. Like, well, we were actually told them, it's like, you might want to consider just getting a photo booth operator. And they're like, no, we want a full on build out. I'm like, you do? Oh, wait. Okay. Then they let us, I was like, so they're willing to really let us have some fun here, build the, structure, with LED lights and graphics and, they're like, we like what you did before, just do that. And at that point too, that particular event, everybody thought they're out of the woods. There was no holding back on that event. So that was like any other event. It felt really good actually, because people were sitting down, they were having dinner, it was a full-on gala, and then this photo activation was happening on the side that we were in charge of, bringing. So we created it, designed it, got the operators, had staff there to kind of make that, really stand out for them.
Money was moving. You just had to know where it was moving to, right? And try to figure out how to get it, because while budgets was being cut for live events, as you see, Mark, it was definitely transitioning into more digital stuff. Before this happened, and I think right when it started happening, things were shutting down. I didn't have any predictions for the future on what was about to happen. But then, business just got incredibly busy on my side of the world, like busier than normal. And it was like, what's going on? And I think for me, just want to ask you, I know you probably didn't have any predictions, but in hindsight now, any thoughts on the journey from then to now?
Yeah, I agree. I think money was moving. I think still moving. These companies have money, and all of our sponsors have money. They need to spend it. Their marketing dollars are there, and we, like you said, we got to figure out how to find it. And that, I think, in many ways, kind of keeps you going, because you got to figure out how to get it. They want to do something. They have to do something. And as time goes by, they're actually holding it, but when it's still there. So we've learned to kind of like look for it and figure out what they're looking for. So if, for example, it's Hennessy, when Hennessy says, no, we just don't want to do a small activation, we want to do a big activation. I'm like, well, okay, we're there. We gave them a budget. I'm like, well, this is what this is going to cost. And like, okay, that's great. Just do it. Same thing with the digital stuff. I'm like, this is now what it cost. And they're like, okay, make it work. Because at the end of the day, like when we did our original digital world, I knew they had, at the time was Bustle, they needed to sell in their sponsors. So typically they would sell the sponsors in a live event, and they would get those sponsor dollars or the advertising dollars. So they were just funneling it through to a digital world. So we had to help them get their money, because it was still there. Mm-hmm. You had, Gap, for example, was still spending on, they were just taking their live dollars, sponsor dollars, and they're putting it into digital world, and we had to help them. I think they made a ton of money on the project. So it really, we were, like you said, the money's there. So I've learned to kind of look for it, figure out who has it, and help them get it, and help us get it.
I was just curious, you don't have to say numbers or anything, but like, what's been the biggest kind of campaign you've worked on since the pandemic?
Probably the Essence in 2021, because even though it's got scaled back, it's not at the massive Superdome. It got scaled back into a series of smaller events, but we still we did a drive-in, we did an outdoor stage. We had 3 activations, which were roaming around the cities of New Orleans. And even though it had like 200 to 300 people at a max per event, we were still there. Our activations and our staging and our screenings were still, these were outdoor big outdoor events. We were doing I think we were looking at like at one time 7 events in a 3-day period. That was pretty big, and what was technically a pandemic, but we couldn't tell anybody, but it was still happening, and we were doing the virtual part component also. So that was probably the biggest.
Okay, because I did see, well, as we were looking at some of the things you've done since we talked last, I did see you had an activation with the Empire State Building as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, the Empire State Building is interesting because they're kind of interesting. They're consistent. We've been with them probably about as long as we've had the business, through their PR department. We kind of, and talk about a business that is their COVID's dramatically hurt them. I used to go to the top of the Empire State Building and do some activations at the observation deck. And when nobody's going up, they're losing, millions of dollars. So for us, we're always doing their window displays. So we do their exhibits there. We do a lot of work on the observation deck. And same thing with them. They have a lot of competition. For example, there's like the Edge and then the One World Trade Center. It's no longer just the Empire State Building because they trying to make money off of the observation deck. They have competitors. So how do we enhance that experience for them? So for us, it was like even it's creating a step and repeat at the observation deck, helping them with that. Helping them do these different things that they're trying to do. But it's not like these big events for them. It's almost like a consistent monthly thing. And they've, even during 2008, during the crash, they've always been very consistent. Like every month we go in, we do an exhibit. Next month we're working with we're doing an exhibit with them and the government of China for the Chinese New Year, and all this exhibit stuff being shipped from China, and we work with them to install it. So it's one of those things that I can almost count on. No matter what happens in the world, they're always kind of there, which is a nice feeling.
I'm assuming, you're not really you didn't do a lot of digital before, right? So I'm assuming that maybe outside of your designer, you even mentioned how your designer, learned some of the software, and but what about like the rest of your staff?
Pretty much everybody's virtual now. So once if you would have asked me the same question, pre-pandemic when people wanted to move away, I'm like, it's not happening. I've had to just come to terms with it. I've got one guy who moved, met a woman on one of our events. And, within 1 week, he went down to visit her in Miami. He never came back. I was like, there's no reason to come back. There's COVID, you might as well stay. And now it's like, you're a year and a half out. So I'm like, I guess it's working out. And we literally talk we have a 10 o'clock call with him. And he's actually the one that loves the whole, digital world. I'm like, just keep going with it. Just go with it. I'm open to it. I've got to be open to everything. And I've had to let a lot of stuff go. So, and then, Lucy, who works with us, she always wanted to move to Chicago. She had a baby. And I was like, well, now's your time. I had to lay her off. But the moment things picked up, we hired her back. And she's working right from Chicago. And she's literally working on we're actually doing an installation right now at the Empire State Building. And they told me not to be there. I'm the only one in New York, right? But Lucy's literally communicating with them every hour. Mm-hmm. She told me not to go. And I was like, okay, I've got to learn to, like they say, work on the business, not in the business, which is always you've heard that before, right? You've heard that before.
No, but I've never heard that.
And that's my biggest challenge. So she's like, you don't need to go. I mean, what we're doing, we're taking out Christmas, we're putting one of our evergreen exhibits in, and the guys have done it. And I'm like, let them do it. They'll be fine. So she's been, FaceTiming with them, and we've taken the technology, and they're just talking back and forth. I'm like, I stopped by there at noon and looked, and like, they don't need me there. It's a good place to be, but it's still uncomfortable for me. But yeah, I mean, everybody's working remote. We've now worked with a team out in London for some of the digital stuff. That's interesting. We're working with them. Danny, I think, we've been working together, online. None of us have been in one spot at one time, unless we're doing a live event in which, when we were doing some stuff in September, I had to fly everybody out. But at least then the project pays for and justifies it. We're all here for a week. And then, we had like 3 projects back to back, and we just kind of made it work. We're looking at next week to kind of do a live meeting with one of the clients for something now, because it's one of those things where we can't just be on a call for 1 hour. This is like a brainstorming strategy session for some project and later down the year, but everybody's got to be in a room and they're open to it. They actually understand the value of it. So I've had to open, the whole staff, I've relied on, I brought people back. Some people we've brought back just on a project by project basis because we don't know necessarily what's happening. But I've been open to it. I've also explored new people that we lost. Like I said, we lost some people who didn't want to get vaccinated. And I was like, why? But all right, it's your choice. And had to bring new people on that I didn't know, and more people are now coming to us because they're leaving their other jobs and they want to try what we're doing. I'm like, okay, I'll try it. We'll try it. I'm open to it. Once again, I may not have thought of you before. Let's see what you can do.
Oh, this is good to hear. I mean, Mark, as always, a friend to the room. We've done business, and it's been on each other's show. So, and especially, it's just, I think for me, it's just very good to see you've been able to be successful and thrive during this pandemic. And that's, very happy. It was a lot of uncertainty. Not just for your business, all businesses for the most part. It was just a lot of uncertainty. So definitely happy that you're checking in with us close to 2 years later, and to see that not only have you survived, in some instances you're actually thriving, and you've been able to discover new revenue models and other opportunities outside of what you were known for before the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, it's just a matter of looking at what we can do, and also not necessarily looking around, not comparing yourself to other companies. I mean, I see what other people are doing, and it's like, oh, I should have had that job. It's like, no, we've got our projects. Let's continue on. Let's stay the course. Right. Even for you, Dan, even starting the podcast, this all happened during COVID. My own podcast, with your help, through COVID, as a way to kind of talk to new clients and talk to people too. And I use that as a form of marketing, right, which is like, I would never have done that before.
So Sean, based off Mark's testimony, right? What would be, I guess, some of your takeaways that we would share with our audience? Usually we say, well, we took this away from reading this book or movie, watching this business movie. What would be some of the takeaways you've gotten?
I mean, takeaway number one is these companies have money, so don't forget that.
That's true.
But pivoting and adapting, evolving, that seems to be a common theme. It's just that's how he was able to maintain, not even just through this crisis, but you mentioned 3 crises throughout the history of your business that you were able to pivot through. So those are like the 2 biggest takeaways. Is remembering that the money didn't disappear just because there's something going on. The people who have money still have it. If anything, they haven't spent it because nothing else is going on around them. But also just the whole idea of rolling with the punches and pivoting your business as much as you can. So,
yeah, I would agree, yeah. Especially the adapting part. I think and it might sound cliche because Sean, we're always talking about business and we're like, you gotta adapt. And I think there's a difference between adapting and just adding things to your business offering just because, for the sake of doing it. There's a difference, right? And but I think if anyone wants to take anything away from this episode, is really just the power of adapting and being resilient, right? And assessing everything and not really going into panic mode, because if there's anything, that would warrant panic mode, I would think it would be the pandemic, right? That would definitely cause for a lot of panic and uncertainty. But there's always some other options and ways to figure things out once you kind of calm down and look at it from different perspectives, right?
Yeah, so true. Mm-hmm. And I think too, for me, what's helped me is try to stay healthy, take care of yourself, and also take the long-term view. So, for me, it's in the beginning of the year, you got to look, what's it going to look like December 2022? We're already there. And how all these things might come at you, but just kind of weave in and out, figure it out, because you got to get to the other end. What does that dollar look? How much business do you want? How much revenue do you want? Where I've got responsibilities with staff and everything. I got to keep all that going. So look beyond. If I looked at just tomorrow, the week, or whatever, I'd go crazy. I have to look beyond into the end of the year already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, Mark, definitely appreciate you stopping by again and giving us some updates and sharing your experiences. Definitely look forward to hearing more updates about the business and where it's going. All right, so that's a wrap on this week's episode of Mark Testa, founder of Mark Steven Experiential Agency. Hopefully, you were able to pick up some insights from this conversation as he shared his business journey during this pandemic. If you have any questions you would like us to answer on the show, shoot us a message on any of our social media channels or shoot us an email at questions@businessgrindshow.com. See you again soon. In the meantime, keep grinding.
The Business Grind is for entertainment purposes. Opinions expressed are those solely of the host and guests. Please consult with a professional and exercise discretion before engaging in any business endeavors.
I'm out here on the grind. I'm out here on the grind.